Welcome to The Word, your favorite podcast for news and opinion.
All right, you're listening to The Word, a podcast brought to you by thedailynerve.com. That's the daily NERV.com. I'm your host, Eduardo Nerette, otherwise known as Eddie.
And I am Faith Vandervoort, here on the West Coast in Los Angeles, California. For our new listeners who are tuning in for the first time today for our special guest, Eddie and I met in 2015 while studying at Georgetown University semester in Washington program. We were the only two conservatives in our cohort, so we went to war together on a consistent basis. Together, we interned on Capitol Hill, worked for Fox News political analyst Angela McGlowan, and we recently started The Daily Nerve, conservative, millennial-based multimedia publication.
And with that, we started a podcast as well, and we're pleased to introduce our first guest today, Mr. Ben Shapiro. How are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
So, conservative political commentator, columnist, radio talk show host, editor-in-chief of The Daily Wire, best-selling author of, I believe, 7 books, graduated UCLA at age 20, Harvard Law at 23. Is there anything I missed? Can you fly? Do you have superpowers?
I don't. Just a couple babies under 3 who are sapping my superpowers. Yeah.
So you know you're hated here, right?
No, they love me. Come on.
But you're used to that. You're hated in a lot of places. I spoke to you earlier. You saw the guy who tore down the posters. But I don't think it's a normal hate. I think they really want to physically harm you. And that kid actually posted on his Facebook. He wrote, quote, I hope Ben Shapiro gets taken out, and I don't mean on a date.
Oh, well, that's nice. That's always good. I mean, that's why, unfortunately, I now have to have security guards when I do these appearances. I didn't used to. A couple of years ago, you never needed that. Now you needed it pretty much. I mean, you need to have it at every campus because you don't know which campus something bad's going to happen. But,
right.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's sad, and that's actually what I wanted to ask you about.
I seem like a relatively unthreatening fellow. I mean, it's always kind of a shock to me. But
does that faze you? Do you think about that often, or do you just kind of let it go over your head? And
No, I let it go over my head, and then I don't tell my wife about it. It phases my wife more than it phases me.
Well, I bet. So actually today, another thing I wanted to talk about, and you said you already saw it, but
I did see this
for our listeners, this is an op-ed in the Alligator. Apparently, Ben Shapiro came up with fake news. He was spewing it years before Donald Trump.
I was the inventor. I invented it. It wasn't Dan Rather with his attempt to destroy the Bush administration. It wasn't Walter Cronkite with his attempt to destroy the Vietnam War. It wasn't any of those people. It wasn't the mainstream media which lied about them. Yeah, exactly. Brian Williams. It wasn't all the members of the mainstream media who lied about the news for 50, 60 years. No, it was me, because we published one rumor at Breitbart, which I have since retracted, and when you make a mistake, you say you made a mistake. That's all.
And she says, I don't know if you're aware, but you make people feel unsafe. You make people feel unsafe here.
I understand that. I'm a very physically intimidating character, and I just leave a string of bodies in my wake. That's what I do.
So that's always fun.
All the way since my high school days, when I was 5'3" and 120 pounds.
Well, I heard you make the short joke the other day, and I said, well, I can relate to that, but I didn't know you said the other day on your program, I get short jokes all the time, people being made fun of in politics, and I was like, I didn't know he was that short.
I mean, you've seen me. I don't think I'm quite as short as they make me out to be.
I get it too.
The Trump folks, if you are not ardently pro-Trump, then this is the big thing, is that you are short. So this is one of their memes.
Yeah.
So I'm 5'4" according to the Trump people, 5'9" according to the ticker tape.
So Faith, we're gonna switch gears here and talk a little bit about young conservatives. Faith, you want to ask him that question?
Absolutely. So Ben, in 5 weeks, I'm graduating college and moving to D.C. to pursue a communications career on Capitol Hill.
Wow.
But being a young conservative is an uphill battle, even with Republicans in the House, Senate, and Oval Office. What is your advice for all of the college conservatives like Eddie and I looking to cut their teeth in an industry and a nation, to be frank, that is so aggressively opposing?
Well, I mean, I think that you have to be aggressive in return in terms of debunking the character argument. The first thing that you get typically on campus or anywhere else is that if you're a conservative, you're a bad person. Not that your arguments are bad, not that your policies are bad. You are inherently a bad human being. And people accusing you of being a bad human being without proof makes them a bad human being. And that should be the normal comeback is right. If you are accusing me of being a racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe who hates the poor without any proof of that, then that just makes you a nasty human being and not worthy of having a conversation. As far as kind of the soul sucking that happens in Washington, D.C., and when you work for a politician, politicians are in the business of compromise. What a lot of politicians don't understand is that if you're going to compromise on policy, but don't compromise on principle. And what I mean by that is that a lot of politicians, because they want to fib to their constituents that everything that they're doing is totally in line with their principles, will simply say that a policy that clearly is not in line with their principles is, in fact, in line with their principles, when it would be more honest to say, look, here's my principle, here's the policy. The policy is the closest we could get to my principle. We couldn't get all the way there, but I want to be honest with you about what it does and what it doesn't do. And very few politicians are willing to do that. I think the first politician who does it may be the first. So, I think that more politicians have been caught up in dishonesty than any other sin. And there's a reason for that. It's because there's a tension in American politics between promising people things they want to hear and lying to them. Because if you're promising things people want to hear, typically you're lying to them. So, I come from a school of thought that says, I'm not going to make you promises about things you want to hear. You're going to, but I'm not in elected politics, right? I'm going to say, I'm not giving you anything free. I'm not giving you anything you want to hear. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And it's my job to try and make sure that the obstacles of other people violating your rights are not in your way. The government violating your rights, that's not in your way. But other than that, it's up to you.
Well, and then back to what she was saying really about, young conservatives being on campus. I think it says something that we've had a number of people for our publication want to write under a pseudonym because they're so afraid of the retribution. I've been in a class here, my freshman year, where they sort of said, okay, we're going to play a little game today. We're going to ask you some questions, and if you strongly agree, you go to that corner of the room. If you disagree, you go to... So they would say things, do you believe in traditional marriage? I was the only one who went up to the strongly agree corner of the room, but then they ask you to justify in front of everyone else, and as you can imagine, they didn't ask the people who believe in gay marriage to justify their beliefs, but they were asking me and maybe the one other person who are forced to stand in that corner, and I think that type of marginalization is really, really sad at this point.
It is sad. I mean, I think that it's a good opportunity for conservatives to get really good at this. We have the same sort of stuff at UCLA. And if you're really good at that, if you're the only person in the corner of the room and you're making a pretty convincing argument, then sometimes it gives you a platform that you wouldn't otherwise have. But you have to be tough to go into that. It's rough. I mean, it's easier to just go along with the crowd and not have to deal with being berated by a teacher.
Right. And Faith, you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that being a college student, you've seen it with Young Americans for Freedom. We grip so tightly to Reagan-era sensationalism of conservatism. Do you think that conservatism will actually become popular again?
Yes, but I don't think that it's going to be because of Reagan. I think that conservatism, because nobody of our generation remembers Reagan. I was born in 84. Right? I'm 10 years older than you guys probably, and I was born in 84. So, the idea that you can cite a guy who left office when I was 4 as the leader of the great movement, that doesn't do you a lot of good. It's like Democrats trying to cite FDR now. It doesn't help. So, I think the better thing to do is there is an argument to be made to millennials, and the argument to millennials is basically stop being jackasses, and by that I mean just get out of other people's business. There is a libertarian streak inside millennials, and they take it to mean don't mess with my sex life. But it really applies to everything. Like, we don't really care about your sex life as far as government, but we also think that you ought to be able to earn what you earn. We think that you ought to be able to keep what you earn. We think that you ought to be able to pursue your business without intervention from the outside. So it's none of your business how I live. It's none of your business what church I go to. It's none of your business how I raise my children. It's none of your business, I think, is actually a pretty solid conservative argument. And I do think that there's going to be a sort of conservative-libertarian merger that happens in the near future in which conservatives recognize that libertarians are correct about government and libertarians recognize that conservatives are correct about values in society. And then that'll be a necessary deal.
Well, and I think on making conservative ideas popular, I would say Trump has a chance to make some parts of conservatism popular. I mean, people say he's not a conservative, so as for the whole movement, I don't think he will make the whole movement popular again. Maybe certain
he doesn't know enough about conservatism to make it popular.
Well, and he wouldn't be doing it by design, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think
doing it because
so what he's made popular is anti-political correctness, which is an aspect of conservatism, but with crossover, but not exclusive. But not exclusively conservative. So this is one of the great errors I think that you see young conservatives making, is they'll see somebody who's a provocateur and is anti-left and is anti-political correctness, and they'll say, oh, that person must be conservative. That person represents conservatism well. And it's like, no, that's not the same thing. Being anti-left and being pro-conservative are two very different things. And I'm not against being anti-left. I do it more than anybody else. But, I think that it's a worthwhile distinction to make and understand how far it's going to take you and how far it's not going to take you.
Well, and on him, we have a couple questions on him and his presidency. But I found this quote the other day, and I thought it was interesting. I wonder if you remember it. I thought it was kind of amazing that 5 years in advance you sort of saw this, and obviously it changed during the course of the election with the things he was saying and doing. But you said, is Donald Trump the best Republican candidate for president out there. It would be tough to argue otherwise. He's got all the makings of a breakout star. He's got bravado and the cash to back it up. If he really runs, he won't have any trouble finding supporters. And that was in 2011. I thought that was interesting. You know,
I mean, listen, in December 2015, I gave a speech at University of Missouri where I said that he would probably win a bunch of swing states that Marco Rubio couldn't because he was specifically appealing to a white blue-collar base. So the reason that I opposed him had nothing to do with his capacity to win. I mean, as the election continued, he, it looked more and more like he wasn't going to until James Comey breaks that FBI letter. But he's, he obviously speaks at a level that a lot of Americans resonate to. He's very macho in the way he expresses his beliefs. He's very short and to the point. I don't think his point's always right, and I think that he very often is fibbing, but that doesn't change his approach to politics, which is a successful one.
And Faith, you wanted to ask him about the Never Trump movement?
Yeah, so you were consistently in the Never Trump camp along with a lot of prominent conservative voices. Mm-hmm. And now what I really respect is that you call a spade, and you say, criticize Trump when he does something bad, praise when he does something good. For example, Gorsuch.
Right.
It's clear you don't play party politics. But what is your candid opinion of his presidency so far?
So, I mean, I give him a grade every single week and at Daily Wire. And so it varies. I mean, I think that one of the problems with Trump is that to give him a single grade is not even really fair to him because there's a couple different lines. There's his appointments. His appointments, I give him an A-. I think his appointments are largely really, really good, including Gorsuch. His regulatory policy, I give an A. I think his regulatory policy is terrific. His foreign policy is bifurcated. There's the stuff he says, and there's the stuff the people he appoints say. The stuff he says like a D. The stuff his people say is like a B. When it comes to domestic politics and Trump care, the stuff that he personally touches is generally not great. The stuff that he lets people who he's hired handle, that stuff tends to be pretty good. So there are a lot of data points, and there's not really a coherent view of his presidency because he's not really a coherent thinker. He's not somebody who has a grand worldview that he's trying to implement here. It's fly by the seat of your pants. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's bad. I don't think that he's elevating the level of the presidency in any real way. I think that my biggest problem with Trump is that if we are going to supplant leftism with a long-lasting conservative movement, you have to do it on the basis of truth. And right now, he's not doing it. He'll rip the media, for example. That's great. I think the media suck. But if you're going to rip the media, you have to say the media suck because they lie. We want to replace that with telling the truth, not the media suck because they're telling the truth about me, and I don't like that. That's not a useful proposition. Right. So, I think it's a mixed bag for Trump. And this is what people always got wrong about the quote-unquote Never Trump movement. It wasn't a movement in the sense that I actually, if you remember my podcast, I did not actively stump for people not to vote for Trump.
Oh, right.
I said I cannot vote for Trump because he does not meet my minimum standard to be president. But if you vote for him to stop Hillary, I totally get that. I totally understand that. It's a difference of opinion. I think that there's a chance that he soul sucks the Republican Party, which I think is still substantial. There's a chance that he does that. But that was my logic. So what that meant was the day after the election, Never Trump was over. I mean, I had fulfilled my pledge, which was I was not going to vote for either of these two people. Now he's president. And so, we move on to the next thing, which is he doing a good job or a bad job? And in 4 years, when he runs again, then we'll determine overall whether that's somebody who's worth supporting, somebody who's not worth supporting.
Well, just as we're talking about, the chance for conservatism to really be a popular movement again, I think there's a huge threat right now for it to fail for several decades. Mm-hmm. And I think I want to point to something, an interview you had on the Kelly File during the election where you spoke about anti-Semitism, where you thought it had really been a tool for the left, but you saw that a small minority, but
the
large
alt-right,
still enough, right, the alt-right. And I mean, do you think it's, sometimes the media talks about it as if they're a sizable minority or maybe even a majority.
No.
Do you think it's something significant enough that conservatism at the national level should try to crush and quell, openly?
I do think they should try and crush and quell, in terms of excising from the movement anti-Semitism, absolutely. Because, that doesn't mean you use the government to do it, but I think that there should be social stigma that attaches to people who say, anti-Semitic things because that's how society works. But yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is, do you think we should be worried about them? Do you think, or
no? I'm not worried about
go away.
I'm not worried about the alt-right taking over the movement. I'm worried about the alt-right becoming a player in it, meaning they don't have to take over the movement wholesale in order to be seen as a legitimate part of the movement. They're not a legitimate part of the movement. They're a big government white nationalist group that's really small, and pandering to them makes them more powerful than they ought to be. And that to me is the bigger problem. So, my biggest problem with the alt-right, aside from the fact that they were personally targeting me for the entirety of the campaign, I was the number one recipient of anti-Semitism online in 2016, apparently, according to the ADL. I think 40% of all anti-Semitic tweets directed at journalists came to me personally, so it was a party. But I can handle that. What is the problem is if top politicians start kind of winking and nodding at them because they want their support. That, to me, is a bigger problem.
Right.
So I don't think that... by the way, I think that Trump of late really has not winked and nodded at them. I think of late he's basically been throwing those people out of the tent more and more. So which is a good thing.
I think the problem comes, and Faith has an example on this she'll get to, but just among young people, they're so quick to say, "Oh, everyone's alt-right that I don't like," or that is so Faith.
Because they don't understand the definition of alt-right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Faith, tell them about the friend or
absolutely.
whatever.
And as a journalism student in a fairly liberal school and liberal field, I've been called a Nazi in class before, and you mentioned the libertarian streak in millennials. Last week, a friend of mine, who's a bleeding heart libertarian, asked me, Faith, why do you think those who identify with the neo-Nazi alt-right movement align their beliefs so closely with the Republican Party? And I didn't know how to answer what policy issue, what notion aligns with racist neo-Nazis. Do you have any insight on that?
Well, I mean, I think that they're mostly anti the left. So for the same reason that the brown shirts were anti the communists, I think that there is the alt-right believes that because their politics is racial in nature, they look at the Democratic Party and they look at the left, and the left has been promulgating this sort of tribalistic philosophy of the left where they say white people are going to be a minority soon, that's a wonderful thing, we need the browning of America, and they talk about this openly, and they never get hit on it because it's racism from the left, which is okay, according to the media. And so the response from the neo-Nazi group is, okay, whichever party is not that, we'll go with that party. And so if there are a lot of white people in the Republican Party, then white is right, and therefore we're going to go with them. I don't think that's reflective of conservative ideology in any way. I think it's more reflective of the demographics of the various parties. In other words, in the 1960s, when the Democratic Party had a large white contingent in the South that was racist, the neo-Nazis probably would have been with them. So it's not the National Socialists were National Socialists. So it's just historically speaking, do a brief digression here, the Nazis were a right-wing party in Germany, but by American standards, they would have been a left-wing party, because American conservatism is of a whole different type. And this I always thought was the danger of having a right-wing movement in the United States that was not based on traditional conservative, classical liberal ideas. Once you get beyond the idea that there is a universal creed that applies to everybody about individual liberty and freedom based in God-given rights in the context of a value-laden community, once you get away from that and now right-wing just means anti-left, you can ally yourself with some pretty nasty people, and those people will ally themselves with you. And that's, I think, what's happened in many ways. I think that people think it's cool, especially young people. They think that it's cool to offend people because they hate political correctness. I alluded to this earlier. It's not. Listen, it's great to be anti-political correctness. It's stupid to just put up memes of gas chambers because you're trying to defeat political correctness. In fact, all you're doing is reinforcing political correctness because people say, wow, what a jackass that guy is. I don't want to be anything to do with him, so yay, political correctness.
And since
this is always what I thought Milo's movement was. This is always my break with Milo. I mean,
so do you think it's bull when he says, "Oh, I'm not all right"? He goes.
Yeah, it's total bullshit. Yeah, I mean, Milo's. He was a fellow traveler of the alt-right. He wrote a piece in Breitbart after I left called "An Establishment Conservatives Guide to the Alt-Right," in which he openly praised the philosophy of the alt-right. He talked about how they were brilliant. He talked about how they thought that race and ethnicity were inseparable. Race and culture were inseparable, which is the basis of racism. And that's, he liked to play the clown nose on, clown nose off routine. And then he also liked to say, well, I'm just anti-political correctness, and I think that I should be able to say whatever I want, darling. That whole bullshit routine. And what I always said was, no one had the balls to ask him this, but somebody should have asked him, listen, you say you're so anti-political correctness and you want to violate every taboo, and it's worthwhile to violate taboos because you're fighting political correctness? Okay, very simple question. Say the N-word right now. Right, it's the most taboo word in the English language. It's the word that no one will say, and you say that you're some sort of great free speech warrior because you're encouraging people to say horrific things to each other that have nothing to do with political correctness. Political correctness is about the idea that I'm saying something valuable, and you are shutting me down because it does not agree with your politics. I'm saying that single motherhood, for example, leads to intergenerational poverty, and you say you can't say that. That's politically incorrect because it's mean to single mothers. Or a man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's a societally useful thing, and you're saying I can't say that because you're going to offend transgenders. That's political correctness. It is not. That's anti-political correctness.
And you mentioned European politics, from a historical perspective, but I guess I want to quickly ask you, what do you think of the far right in Europe, Marine Le Pen? I mean, do you think
I always thought that Trump was more aligned with the far right in Europe than he is with the American conservative movement.
And so generally, what do you think of the far right in Europe?
I mean, I think that there are gradations of it, so it depends. Marine Le Pen is better than her father was. I mean, Jean-Marie Le Pen was a disaster area. Marine Le Pen has softened a lot of her father's anti-Semitic rhetoric. She doesn't do that anymore. Basically, the only difference between the far right and the far left in Europe is immigration. I mean, they both want a substantial welfare state. They both want a lot of spending. They on foreign policy, they're quasi-isolationists, both the far right and the far left in Europe. The only difference really is how many people you let inside the borders. And if that's what American politics is going to devolve into, which is what I'm concerned about, that it just becomes the left versus the anti-left. But the anti-left doesn't actually have a philosophy, it's just anti-left.
Right.
And then we haven't won anything, we've lost something actually rather important.
Right. And speaking of Breitbart, some people would say that Breitbart is now synonymous with the alt-right. And I know you spoke very highly of Andrew Breitbart, and as have many others, saying that Breitbart wouldn't be the same if he were still around. And I guess for some of us young conservatives, we didn't really get to know Andrew Breitbart. So, I mean, if you would comment just a little bit.
Andrew, number one, he wasn't really a political guy. Andrew was an anti-bullying guy. So the way he got into politics was he saw the Clarence Thomas hearings. He thought that it was nasty that the left was going after Thomas that way. And he decided to fight them because he thought that it was, at the same time they were holding up Clinton as some sort of apex of virtue. Well, he was, in the midst of the Jennifer Flowers scandal. Clarence Thomas was horrible because of a trumped-up charge against him. And so Andrew was a kind-hearted, warm-hearted, eccentric, anti-bullying guy who hated people who bullied. And so, he hated racism, he hated anti-Semitism. He never would have allowed the sort of trafficking in the alt-right circles that Breitbart did later. And, I think it's an overstatement to say that they are an alt-right website. Even the alt-right wouldn't say they're an alt-right website. I would say that they, after I left particularly, they made some overt moves toward pandering to the alt-right because they thought that they had a base in sort of the 4chan and Reddit community from the alt-right, which is, 4chan and Reddit are broader than that, but that's where they thought they had a significant base. So if they just pander to that base, then that's an untapped market.
Faye, do you want to ask him about the Freedom Caucus?
Yeah, so a little over a week ago, we watched the House Republicans crumble before our very eyes, basically. The establishment came up with the American Health Care Act, and the members of the Freedom Caucus, along with them, made it impossible for leadership to make it happen. And my mind keeps going back to something that my boss, Angela Brown, lives by. She says, united we stand, divided we fall. But is that really the case here, Ben? Did the Freedom Caucus ruin our chances of repealing Obamacare,
No.
or did they save America from another disastrous blatant container?
So Republicans were going to take over Obamacare. They were going to make it Obamacare 2.0. They were going to claim they repealed it and then own it. And that seemed like a really bad plan to me. The only part of the plan that was any good was Paul Ryan's proposal to change Medicare, or change Medicaid, rather, from a need-based program to a block grant program to the states. The chances that it was going to stay at the number that he created were really low. I mean, Congress was going to come back in, they were going to see there was need, and they were going to up the grant, or they were going to go back to a need-based program 5 minutes from now, which they could, right? There's nothing that says they can't, and Democrats would simply reinstate what was. I thought that it was a program that did not move us toward the free market in any substantial way. It kept the central regulations of Obamacare. It claimed that the work was done. It was rolled out idiotically. I think what happened here is that basically it was going to take a long time to hash out what a good bill was going to look like with all of these various factions in the House. Trump didn't care about that. He wanted it done right now, and he'd made a bunch of promises during the campaign that he just couldn't keep. Things like insurance companies will continue to cover pre-existing conditions. Well, once you say insurance companies are going to cover pre-existing conditions, there's only two ways to pay for that. One is to have direct government subsidies, right? One is to have one is to have a mandate, and the other is direct government subsidies. Those are the only two ways to do that. Because you're either going to have to subsidize the insurance industry to pay for a bunch of sick people, or you're going to have to mandate that people buy health insurance even if they're healthy or even if they don't want it. Those are the only two ways to do it. And so they had to create both. They did a backdoor mandate, and then they had a new entitlement program that were both in that bill, and that was largely because that's something that Obama wanted. If they really wanted to pass repeal, they could have just passed it. Right? Paul Ryan could have said, I'm just going to pass repeal. Everybody here is on record they want repeal. We're going to repeal as much as we can through reconciliation, and then we're going to come up with a piecemeal approach. He wasn't willing to do that because he didn't want to pay the political burden of getting rid of Obamacare and being blamed when people get kicked off of Medicaid. And Obama and rather Trump didn't want that blame either. I'm not sure that Trump would have signed a simple repeal bill. I think that Trump wanted what he wanted. I mean, he got sort of the outcome that he wanted, which was either I'm going to get Obamacare light and call it Trump care, or I'm going to have this thing go down in flames and I'll blame whoever, right? And so he had to blame the Freedom Caucus.
Well, what I told Faith is I don't think specifically with Trump Care that it was as bad as they said. Oh, I guess we're not going to do it now. That's it. It's tabled. It's over. I mean, I think they'll get back to it, but I think to a larger issue, and maybe I'm exaggerating. You can tell me. I think this speaks to a problem that I think conservatives, or at least not conservatives, Republicans in Congress have a major chance here with the majority that they have in both chambers that even Reagan didn't have. And I do think there's a chance, and this event spoke to it, that they may screw it up.
Yeah,
do you
for
think
sure.
I'm exaggerating?
No, I think they are going to screw it up. And I think one of the reasons is because you have a fractious caucus. You did before. There are ideological gaps in the Republican Party that obviously existed. And it requires leadership in order to overcome those gaps. And Trump is not going to provide any sort of ideological leadership. Like, Trump didn't even know it was in the bill. So
Right.
Trump making an affirmative case to the people as to why this bill was good, that didn't have any impact. Instead, he just went for the simplistic, this is your only chance to repeal, take it or leave it. And the
Which
Freedom
he already
Caucus
went over on a week later. He's like, oh, well, they're
right, now he's going back to it.
Yeah,
Right now,
right.
now he's golfing with Rand
Right.
Paul and saying we're going back to it. So, fine. If you want to do that, Mr. President, let Rand Paul write the bill. Let Rand Paul negotiate it with Paul Ryan. Let them come up with a consensus program and shut the hell up. Like, that would be my solution to this. Is if you're not going to lead, then get out of the way at least.
We want to ask you a couple quick things on just what's going on. I saw the Daily Wire was one of the publications that had the story on Susan Rice. What do you make of that? Do you?
So I mean, we were just reporting what Eli Lake had reported.
Right, Eli Lake,
Yeah. And it was originally reported, I think, by Mike Cernovich, which is odd. I don't think the administration. I think the administration, if you're going to look for a credible source to distribute your material, I would suggest that you go elsewhere than the guerrilla mindset guy. But in any case, Eli Lake confirmed it. I think Maggie Haberman at the New York Times confirmed it as well. And that was basically that Susan Rice, for those who missed the story, essentially there's a bunch of intel gathered on all the people we were spying on, including people in the Russian consulate and people abroad. And a bunch of Trump people got kind of caught up in that surveillance, meaning they weren't targeted the way that Trump claimed, which is untrue. But they were caught up in surveillance that included foreign sources. And then Susan Rice, this is where Susan Rice gets into a little bit of dicey business. She decides that she's going to target Trump's team for unmasking, meaning she's going to ask the intelligence community for raw intel with the names of the members of the Trump team who are talking to people overseas. That is not against the law, but it's really highly politicizing a position that it's an abuse of power. It's not against the law technically, but it's an abuse of power. It's particularly an abuse of power when you then disseminate the information far and wide, and somehow it ends up in the pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post. That's an actual crime. When you leak information about innocent Americans, claiming that from classified data, that's a crime. And at the very least, her political activity made that crime easier.
And we're speculating now, but do you think President Obama knew?
I can't imagine that President Obama didn't know that Rice was looking for the unmasked material.
Right. I sort of get shocked.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Well, so do I. And when I watch CNN or whatever, you see the clips, they act. How can you say President Obama knew? I mean, that's ridiculous. How can you say
his national security advisor knew?
Right.
They say that James Clapper knew, according to Fox News.
They just sort of flip
it's like
out.
Everybody except for Obama knew.
Right. They flip out at the notion that I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't put anything past the prior administration.
No, I mean they were spying on American citizens on a routine basis. I mean, they did it to James Rosen over at Fox News. They did it to an AP reporter. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that'd be any great shock, but it's. You watch the media flip immediately if it turns out that Paul Manafort was actually cutting deals with the Russians. Watch how quickly the media shifts to Trump must have known. Right. So Obama doesn't know anything that's happening around him, no matter how nefarious it is, but Trump must have known that Paul Manafort was cutting deals with the Russians. You watch how fast they switch.
Well, and then one more, and then I'll turn it over to Faith. But did you see Mark Cuban's sort of theory? I don't really
I think Mark Cuban's theory is actually
right. I think
pretty correct. I think that's right. That was actually, I expressed that theory on my podcast actually a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that he hired a guy. He didn't know who he was. He was told that this guy was the fixer. The guy comes in. He has Russian connections. Trump finds out about it and fires him. That's entirely plausible.
And that Trump what Mark Cuban had said for the listeners was that Trump essentially he doesn't think is smart enough to know what his people were doing tooth and nail, and that they were sort of doing this, and now he's kind of freaking out and he doesn't know what to do. That's
he
why
clearly doesn't know what his own people are doing now, in the administration.
That's why you see the tweets saying, "Oh, watch the Fox and Friends report. They prove that I'm right," or whatever, because he's just kind of squabbling with something to vindicate himself.
I think all of that. I think all of that is right. I think that Trump has the attention span of a fruit fly, and that could be okay as long as he delegates. But if you've got him poking his hands in everywhere while having the attention span of a fruit fly, that does not make for a good solid governance, and it leads you down the silly path of tweeting silly things and then doubling down and tripling down and quadrupling down on the same silly things. Like imagine how differently the first 100 days of his administration goes if he doesn't say the wiretapping thing. He just shuts up, and then this emerges, all this stuff about Susan Rice emerges, and then he says, I can't believe the Obama administration was gathering intel, even, on my team based on Susan Rice's go-ahead in the middle of the campaign and afterward. Like, if he were just factual, you know how much better his administration would be?
But do you think they would have been looking had he not said that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, his team knew since February. He tweeted when did he tweet the wiretap? I think that's the beginning of March. In the middle, I think it was February. It might have been February.
I think maybe, yeah.
It may have been January. I'd have to look up the timeline. Right. But yeah, I mean, when they came across that, you think that his team wasn't going to alert him to that when they came across it? And even if they didn't uncover it, okay, so what? Does the country really, like, are we that much worse off as opposed to having 3 months of this disaster area? Like, what if? Imagine that he had come out of the gate and he said to Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, I want you guys to come to the White House. We're going to have a sit-down. We're going to hash out what the basic principles of healthcare are going to be, and then we're going to get a whip count. We're going to really do this thing right. The podcast has grown so quickly. I mean, we went from 3,000 listeners when we first started in September of 2015 to, if you include Facebook Live, 500,000 listeners a day in a year and a half. And we went from a website that had no traffic, didn't exist in September 2015, to a website that has significantly over 40 million page views.
I think we lost her.
Oh, the aliens came for Faith.
Will, can you, hold on, let me fix this. This is awkward. Wait.
I can't believe that Obama wiretapped Faith.
I'm just going to shut her off.
No.
Is it doing it?
No, it's done. It's no longer flashing. No worries.
We lost Faith. She was being wiretapped. And I gotta ask you a couple more. We had someone on Facebook want to ask, what are your thoughts on the fair tax? I actually couldn't find what if you had ever.
Yeah, I like the fair tax. I mean, I think there are a bunch of good tax plans that have been brought up before. The fair tax is one. The flat tax is another. I don't have Neil Bortz's fair tax book is good. I mean, I think that
right.
Listen, anything is better than our current system. Our current system is just awful.
And then I had to ask you one more. So, why do you think? I heard you say, and I totally agree with this quote, and I'm not quoting you specifically, but you said, you don't like it when people say, oh, well, socialism's a good idea, but it doesn't work. And I think you came back and said, no, it's a horribly shitty idea, and it's an evil idea. And
That's
I agree.
correct. Yeah.
Why do you think people have this sense, especially young people? You can point to Cuba, Venezuela, you can point to anywhere in the world, and they still have this thing that it's cute. Socialism's cute, it's fun.
Because young people are trained to think, in theory, what's fair? And so you're trained in theory what's fair. Well, what's fair is that everybody gets the same thing. It's like, no, that's not fair. That's actually quite evil because you're forcing people who achieve to pay for people who don't achieve. You're making them slaves to people who are not making money. And you're destroying the value of consensual enterprise. So, no, I think that that's why conservatives lose. It's because we say, well, socialism doesn't work. Look at Venezuela and Cuba. Look, it's evil because of Venezuela and Cuba. No, the idea itself. You have to attack the idea itself, not just the effects of the idea.
Right.
The idea itself. And if you don't attack the idea itself, then people can just come back and say, well, they just did it wrong in Cuba. They just did it wrong in Venezuela. If they did it right, though, then it would totally work.
Right.
And it's like, no, it won't work because it's a really, really crappy idea.
Well, we got to wrap up. We took more than his time than he gave us, but we thank him for that. Thank you, Ben Shapiro. Thank you so much. You're listening to The Word. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.